Think about your last really heated debate. Maybe it was around the dinner table during a holiday gathering, or perhaps in a super tense meeting at work. You walk into that disagreement and you genuinely think you're just defending the facts. But let's be brutally honest right out of the gate in this explainer. You probably aren't arguing because you actually care about the truth. Most of the time, we argue because we are absolutely terrified of looking weak.
So let's dive into this. Your brain essentially acts like a highly paid defense attorney. Psychologists actually refer to this dynamic as confirmation bias. See, your brain isn't in the business of rigorously questioning your opinions. It's strictly in the business of defending them at all costs. Just think about the last time you Googled something to settle a debate. You rarely type in a perfectly neutral question, right? Like, if you love coffee, you don't Google, is coffee good or bad for you? No, you type in health benefits of drinking coffee. Just like a lawyer, your brain only takes cases it already knows it can win. You aren't actually looking for the objective truth. You're really just hunting for evidence to prove you were right all along.
Welcome to today's explainer, where we're unpacking the shadow motive, ego versus logic. Let's get right into it. I am so incredibly excited to share this with you today, because to truly understand why we argue the way we do, we have to look at the ancient hardware running inside your modern brain. Enter the amygdala. This is your brain's ancient threat detection system. Have you ever wondered why arguments over completely trivial things feel so deeply personal? Well, it's because evolution literally designed them to feel that way. For the vast majority of human history, surviving meant staying in the tribe. Being rejected by your social group meant exile, and exile was effectively a death sentence. You would literally starve or get eaten. So your brain actually learned to treat your social standing as a matter of absolute biological survival. And honestly, this illustrates the total absurdity of it all. To your ancient brain, a physical threat, like a literal charging tiger, is entirely indistinguishable from a social threat, like, say, a disagreement over tax policy. When someone corrects your pronunciation of a word in front of your friends, or tells you your political opinion is wrong, your amygdala activates. But the crazy part is, this ancient alarm bell is incredibly blunt. It does not cleanly distinguish between a life-or-death predator situation and a mere challenge to your publicly held beliefs. It treats them both with the exact same frantic urgency. Because the amygdala can't tell the difference, it triggers what scientists call a defensive cascade. First, your heart rate goes up. Your body starts pumping blood away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical part of your brain, and sends it straight to your extremities for a fight or flight response. Secondly, because that logical center is literally losing its resources, your reasoning quality immediately goes down. And third, you completely stop evaluating the actual argument and start fiercely protecting your intellectual territory. Logic literally evaporates the moment we feel our status is challenged. Now, I want to ask you a direct, maybe slightly embarrassing question to test this. Next time you're in a debate, I want you to pay close attention to your physical body. Have you ever felt your shoulders tighten up, your chest close, and your breathing get shallow the exact second someone contradicts you? Like even before your brain has fully processed their words. That physical reaction isn't a sign of weakness or some personality flaw. That is an ancient, involuntary, biological reflex, desperately trying to save your life from a completely imaginary tiger. Here is why the survival mechanism is lethally dangerous to your critical thinking. When you're trapped in that biological threat response, open-minded evaluation is neurologically impossible. But here's the catch. You don't feel irrational. In fact, you feel incredibly logical and clear-headed. The brilliant analytical psychologist Carl Jung actually warned us about this very illusion. He called it the shadow, which he defined as a hidden cluster of unacknowledged motives. Even when we think perfectly rational, we are often being completely puppeteered by these deeply hidden drives. So what exactly are these hidden motives pulling the strings? Well, the shadow utilizes things like a desperate need for recognition at work. Maybe you shoot down a coworker's perfectly good idea in a meeting simply because you subconsciously want the boss to notice you instead. Or maybe it's an extreme competitiveness with a sibling where you just absolutely cannot let your brother be right about a random movie trivia fact. Or perhaps it's an intense fear of losing authority. The shadow doesn't operate by making you scream and shout. Instead, it brilliantly borrows the calm voice of reason and morality to mask purely defensive behavior. You'll build an entirely complex system of flawless reasoning just to defend a buried insecurity you won't even admit to having. When your ego is threatened, you completely abandon the search for truth, and the conversation devolves rapidly. Step 1, you turn the dialogue into a competitive sparring match, where there literally must be a winner and a loser. Step 2, you start tossing out intellectual word salads. You know exactly what I mean. This is when people start using massive complex jargon or bringing up wildly irrelevant data just to confuse the other person and sound superior. Step 3, relentless interruption. You stop listening to their points entirely and just wait for a millisecond of silence to force your next counterattack. These are all underhanded tricks the ego resorts to in order to assert dominance.
Which brings us to a stark, kind of cynical reality check. You are defending a ghost. You're using flawless reasoning just to protect a fabricated, fragile persona. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly maintain an image of someone who is never, ever wrong. You aren't using logic to map out reality and find the truth. You are using logic as a shield to protect an illusion of yourself.
This leads us to a pretty profound warning from Jung. He said, "Where people are the most rigidly certain, they are often the least free." The most dangerous state of mind isn't when you're confused or questioning yourself, no way. The most dangerous state of mind is when you feel completely objective, flawlessly lucid, and perfectly justified. If your thought process is so locked in that it literally does not allow itself to be questioned, well, it isn't an argument anymore. It's a defense mechanism holding you hostage. So how do we dismantle this shadow and actually reclaim our logic? We cannot let our ancient, panicky hardware dictate our modern reality. We need what is called epistemic accountability. This is the concrete psychological tool required to strip the shadow of its control. It essentially means holding your own belief-forming process to a strict, rigorous standard, forcing yourself to take back your mind from these ancient reflexes. I absolutely love this framework because it takes abstract psychology and makes it incredibly practical for everyday life. We create this accountability through a two-part motive audit framework. It involves first asking the question, who is thinking, followed by deploying what we call the 4-word cheat code. Consider this your ultimate toolkit to dismantle toxic arguments, both in the people around you and, vastly more importantly, in yourself. Step 1 requires some radical honesty. The moment you feel that defensive rigidity flare up in your chest, you need to pause and ask yourself, who is thinking in me right now? For Jung, the foundation of critical thinking in a difficult moment is not having sharper reasoning or better data. It's recognizing the actual voice speaking inside you. Is this my objective, truth-seeking self, or is this just my bruised ego, desperate to not look foolish in front of my peers? And now for step 2. This is your ultimate psychological cheat code. What would change my mind? You have to relentlessly train your intellectual humility. Force yourself to answer this remarkably simple but wildly uncomfortable question. For example, if you're arguing about a complex topic like the economy, and you literally cannot think of a single statistic, study, or piece of evidence that could possibly make you concede a point, well, your belief is completely unfalsifiable. You aren't thinking, you're just coping.
So the crucial takeaway here is understanding the fundamental difference between changing your mind and losing a fight. Changing your mind is an incredibly healthy, normal process of updating your software with better data. Losing a fight, on the other hand, feels like an ego death. The next time you enter a debate, I urge you to proactively pre-commit to the possibility of updating your belief before the threatening evidence even arrives. When you do that, and the opposing evidence eventually shows up, your identity won't be on the line. Your ego stays perfectly intact because your goal was learning, not winning. This brilliantly illustrates what it actually means to be a truly rational thinker. A master debater tolerates ambiguity and discomfort. They perfectly separate their core identity from their current opinions, treating those opinions like tools that can be discarded if they break, rather than treating them like limbs they have to defend. And above all, they defeat the shadow by never letting hidden motives do the thinking for them. Remember, updating your beliefs based on new evidence is not a sign of weakness. It is the literal definition of a functioning brain. We're going to wrap up today's explainer with a provocative challenge directly to you. Will you pre-commit to updating your beliefs in your very next disagreement? As long as you let your amygdala treat everyday disagreements like literal death sentences, your logic will always be a slave to your ego. Master your own mind first, and don't let your ego run the argument. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating topic with me today, and keep questioning everything.